Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Coil Chat. And I am more convinced than ever that Karen Read is innocent. And I am going to talk about my reasoning behind it. I have reviewed so much of the evidence, read so much, listened to some of the testimony, and I am here to convince you she's innocent too. Now, I know that there's a lot of strong opinions about it. And obviously she's starting her new trial today. You know, those jurors are going to have to make their own conclusion based off the evidence. But I want to talk to you about why I have come to the conclusion I just don't think she did it. Now, if you don't know who Karen Read is and you've been living under a rock, she's a Massachusetts woman who's accused of killing her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, by allegedly backing over him with her SUV and leaving him to die in a snowstorm in January 2022. Now, the prosecution claims she was intoxicated, angry, and left him outside after a fight. But the defense is saying something completely different. And if you don't remember, she had her first trial. The jury unanimously said that they could find her not guilty on the murder charge, but they were deadlocked on involuntary manslaughter. And because of that, the court just found a mistrial on both charges. So now she's being recharged for both, for murder and involuntary manslaughter. And a lot of people are mad about that because they're like, that's double jeopardy. She had her trial. But unfortunately, double jeopardy does not apply unless the juries actually say not guilty. And they didn't do that because they got deadlock on the involuntary manslaughter. The judge then declared a mistrial. Therefore, she could be charged again. And for some reason, even with the juror come back and saying not guilty, they decided to charge her with murder again. But let's talk about some of the evidence that I just think throws so much doubt in this case. And I just don't find that somebody could find reasonable doubt, beyond reasonable doubt for a conviction. So the first one is there's just a lack of direct evidence. There's no camera footage, no eyewitnesses, no confirmed forensic evidence proving Karen Read hit John O'Keefe with his SUV. You'd expect in a high-profile case like this, there would be some clear physical evidence tying her to the act, but there just isn't. There's no blood spatter on the car consistent with a hit, no conclusive vehicle damage or hair fiber transfer, and the injuries on O'Keefe may not match being hit by a car at all. The forensics are murky. According to the defense, the injuries O'Keefe sustained, such as a blunt force trauma and deep scratches, might not have matched being hit by a car, but instead suggests he was beaten and potentially attacked by a dog inside the house of a fellow officer where he was last seen alive. O'Keefe had injuries consistent with a fall or beating, not a classic vehicle impact. It just makes things so murky, and it causes this reasonable suspicion, reasonable doubt. The next thing is that the defense have been saying this from day one, that this was a possible police cover-up, and the problems within the police department during this investigation are just rot. I mean, rotten, like that's the word you use, rot, but it is like just gross. The defense alleges a cover-up, including the very police department O'Keefe worked for. They argue that O'Keefe might have died inside the house during a fight, and his body was later staged outside to frame Read. Multiple people in the house had connections to law enforcement. Delays or gaps in how evidence was collected and who was interviewed raised eyebrows. And then text messages between key players suggest coordination or at least suspicion that something else happened. I mean, the lead detective on the case has been fired from the Boston Police Department for his disgusting things that he did during the investigation. One of those sending horrific text messages about Karen Read to other people in the department. It took a whole year for them to do the investigation and finally fire him, which they just did. Now, the taillight confession is so questionable, you guys. One of the prosecutor's key claim is that Read confessed by asking someone, could I have hit him? But this statement was allegedly made in distress, panic moment, not a clear confession. She was intoxicated. We knew that. She was emotional and she was in shock. Asking, could I have, is not an admission of guilt. It's a question. There are conflicting reports about who heard this and how it was even interpreted. So for us to be able to say, oh, she admitted to it is so far-fetched for the prosecution to connect that line. It's improbable, but they keep going after it. She called 911 and tried to help. Karen Reed was the one who called for help and stayed at the scene. People who are trying to cover up a crime typically don't behave that way. She helped search for him. She had no idea where he was. She showed concern and tried CPR when they finally found him. Her reaction does not fit a cold-blooded killer. There's reasonable doubt all over this place. Even if some of the evidence seems suspicious, in the U.S. justice system, guilt must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. There's conflicting timelines. There's missing or vague evidence, motives, and biases in the investigation. Like one of the phones is missing because the detective said he destroyed it. So going into the second trial, I know that the prosecutors want to find a killer, but they have never pointed the finger at anybody else, and they probably should. But the detectives concentrated so much on Karen Reed because they wanted to not even allow somebody else to be looked at, including a police officer within the Boston Police Department, because heaven forbid scandal, right? Well, this is already a scandal. If you look at this evidence, I just don't see how a jury can find beyond a reasonable doubt that she was guilty of murder. Murder requires you to have a forethought, meaning she planned it out and then acted out on that. She planned to kill him. Now, involuntary manslaughter is meaning that she didn't necessarily mean to do it, but she did something that was beyond what a reasonable person would do that would cause harm and or death. That is a little bit more reasonable if we were going after something, but for some reason the prosecutors want to go after both, and it just doesn't make sense. You don't have to believe in conspiracy theories to recognize that this case is full of inconsistencies, shady police connections, and forensics that don't fully line up. Karen Reed may have made mistakes that night, but whether she murdered John O'Keefe with her car, that is so far from beyond reasonable doubt. And I'm a lawyer, and I've looked at all of this, and I've looked at the evidence, and I just think if you are a reasonable person sitting on that jury, listening to the police department and all the disgusting things they did, the fact that they didn't investigate any other line of, they didn't question people for weeks. If you look at that, I don't know how a reasonable juror can say beyond a reasonable doubt she did it. I just don't. It's going to be really, really interesting. I'll keep you updated, but that is why I just don't find that beyond a reasonable doubt that a jury can convict Karen Reed of the murder of John O'Keefe. I want to know what you think. Put it in the comments and we'll talk about this. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and follow me on all other social media platforms for all the latest news. Thanks.